Well, hi guys and girls, Emma again. Welcome back to the spare room. This is a quick video about my little Centec Mill. Now I've sort of got some lights and some camera mounts, etc. set up. I thought might make a little video and just show some of the work that I've done on this mill and how I've got it set up, because I know there's a couple of guys who've got little horizontal mills and want to know really what I've done to make it useful. Now, I didn't jump straight in and restore this milling machine. It was working when I got it, and it did a bit of work, with a little bit of compromise for a little while. And while I used it occasionally, there's a big thunderstorm hanging around here, so it's going to rain. But I used it for a little while and sort of worked out what I wanted to do, and then sat down and got the gear and did it properly and got it going. It's not finished by any means. There's guards to go on it, and there's a DRO to go on it and stuff like that, and probably at some point a vertical head. But at this point it's usable and it's a pretty good little mill. As you can see, I've been chopping up some 40mm 4140 with this today for a project. It's actually for the camshaft on my engine. No problems at all. Sail through that, and that's with a 4-inch side and face cutter. It's 3mm thick, something like that. So it'll run through that like a dream. I had to take a couple of cuts, but not any issue at all, just cranking that through there, and it's cutting nicely. And you can't do that with a mill of this footprint on anything that's imported nowadays, but it's good to be able to use it as a drop saw if I need to, when something's a bit oversized. However, running a 4-inch side and face cutter on this mill was impossible before, because the motor that was on it, which was 1450 RPM, and the gearing that was on it, it just was incapable of running this cutter slow enough to do any decent work. They'd just burn up on the corners. If we have a look here, I've set this DRO up here on the wall. That's about half. That's full there, full RPM on the machine, which is 50 hertz. Now the way I've got it, it'll run nicely at 25 hertz, no problems at all. Which, if we have a look, that cutter there is doing about, what do we got, 960 RPM on this motor. And it's a 12-inch and a 2.5-inch wheel there. That's giving us, it's a 4.8 ratio. So we've got about 900 measured on the motor flat out. It's giving us 187 RPM on this shaft. Now this is 2:1. That's 93 RPM. That's sort of doing all right there. That's sort of doing all right there at full speed. But if we halve that again with the VFD, 46 RPM we're doing at 25 hertz, and that'll run all day, and it'll slip the belts before it even thinks about stalling the motor. So That's 46 RPM there, and heaps of power. It's just sailed through that piece of 40 mil, 4140 at full depth. There's a cutter here which is about 30 millimeters. No worries at all. No belt slip, no nothing, just chunk, 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 and through and out the other side. No cutter heat. The motor's not running hot, and that's what I've done. Now this motor is 3-phase, and it's 1 horsepower. That's plenty. It's about twice as big physically as the motor that was on it, which I think was probably 1/2 horsepower, and it was a little bit fast and a little bit underpowered. But 1 horsepower, geared down from 900. It's a 6-pole motor, geared down through to 48 RPM. Heaps and heaps and heaps of power there to run it'll run an inch wide, 2-inch wide slab cutter, no worries at all, and you'll enjoy doing it. So that's what I've done. It's 900 RPM here, 2.5 inch here and 12 inch here. So what do we got? 65 and 300 millimeters. And then the gearing here is 2-to-1 on a flat belt. Never going to slip. And we've got a full range of speeds. This pulley is probably a bit quick, and probably I might put the original one back on, which was I think it was an 8-inch pulley, 9-inch pulley. And that'll give us a bit more top end, which mightn't hurt if we're going to use this in reverse. And that's running backwards, which is the right direction for an end mill. At 4 speed there, that's 187 RPM on the spindle. We can double that by changing this spindle ratio is 1-to-1 and the next ratio is 1-to-2. So we can get 370 RPM on this shaft here, which is what we've got there. Not fast enough really. If I was to change this pulley back, which I'm going to certainly try, and put the 8-inch pulley back on here, that'll give us a 3.6-to-1 ratio here. That's 250 RPM on here, and 500 here. You also lose a little bit of horsepower here, so there might be some issues with that. For drilling holes, that sort of work, it's good, but with this mill, it's certainly a lot quicker and easier if you're roughing something to size to use a side and face cutter or a slitting saw or just a face cutter even. Which I've got a lot of, so they're cheap and easy to run. So that's what I've done, and it might be of interest to someone. I'm probably going to put this on and see how much power it is at some point fairly soon, and then if that looks all right, we'll put some sort of a guard on this pulley here, and probably a guard on this one. And we'll start thinking from then, working out a speeds and feeds chart and all those sort of things, a speed chart, so that I know what RPM everything's doing without calculating it out. At this point, that's doing there flat out what, 95 RPM. There comes the thunder. And that should be giving me nearly 400 RPM there. So it's alright for drilling holes, that sort of work. Not particularly good for end mills yet, but I think we can get another 10-20% by putting a smaller pulley back on. So that's what I'm going to do. I've got to find another belt, or find the original belt wherever it was, and adjust this again. I've made an adapter here that's got Umbracos through, tapped into a 10mm steel plate on this side, and tapped into a 10mm steel plate on this side. So the plate in the middle's got two sets of holes. This one here has got slots, so we can adjust this up and down and adjust the belt. And this one here's got slots too, but I don't think I'll ever adjust that, because I think they're 8mm bolts, something like that, 4 of them in each side. So that's a good tidy little conversion. So got this flat surface here on this casting that I'm going to fit the first scales, the DRO on. Bolt here and a bolt here, I think, at this point, tapped in, and the slide on there. And then, depending on where it wants to go, then probably some sort of a piece over here to bolt on, probably straight on this surface here. And that should give us a pretty good up and down slide, and we can put that back in there out of the way nicely, and make a bracket that comes across here onto here, and it's going to be nice and rigid. I really want to leave this alone, because this is our adjustment for height at the moment, with the Tommy bar just up and down on the screw. That's a bit of a pain in that. Eventually I would like to build, and this is all just a project, this has a lever at the back for quick movement up and down, and that's great, but it's not real precise, and while it's plenty good enough, it's a nuisance in that you don't get the full travel on this lever without moving the lever on the taper and then adjusting it to a different position. So that's the biggest problem with that. And this is great if you only want, and we might even put a longer screw in here, but if you want to move this 10 thou, and we've got a DRO on here, it should be very easy just to use the T-bar in here and move this up and down, and not worry too much about this handle. However, as you can see, this runs into the bench here, which is a bit of a pain and makes it very difficult to get hold of when it's round the other side, or when it's back. If we put this all the way down here, this moves back around the other side, and it's in the way when you want to undo the drawbar and all those sort of things, and you've got to reach around and grab it. That's a nuisance. So what I would like to do is put a worm and a wheel and a hand wheel on here at some point. That's what the next model had. The 2A has that in a nice casing. Shouldn't be a particularly difficult thing to make an adapter to go on this bushing here, or the stub that sticks out, with a wheel that you can move up and down or adjust around, or bolt on here, and a wheel and a worm at 20 to 1 or 30 to 1 or 60 to 1 or something, so that you can put some sort of a calibration on here and you can move it 200th hour, whatever. So that's another project for this mill. That would improve it out of sight, to have a hand wheel on here with the worm drive. That will probably happen. We can get a fairly big hand wheel on here. We could probably put something that's 6 or 8 inches diameter. So there's no hand wheel on here, it's missing on my machine. And because this is an 8 TPI thread, 8 TPI lead screw in here, it's a bit of a nuisance even having a hand wheel, because every turn's 1/8 of an inch or 125 on the wheel. That's a pain. So I'm not going to replace this wheel. I could make a nice wheel to go on there, but you've got to reset it every turn, because you lose count. If you want to go, the metric's a pain in the neck. So DRO on the back here with a slide on the back that moves backwards and forwards should give us enough, and it's going to limit our travel a little bit. However, you're not using this part of the table out here very often. It limits a little bit the amount of distance that we can machine, or the amount of space we can machine without moving the cutter along the arbor. Not a big deal, and probably a reasonable trade-off for a DRO scale this way, and for even just lengths of keyways or laying out bolt holes on the back or whatever. That's a good idea. This one here is a bit more complicated. So this one here, which is basically is the Z on a horizontal mill, is a bit more complicated. And whether I put something inside the cheek here in the middle that works off the nut, or whether I put something on the outside that works on this side. There's not a lot to bolt anything to on this side, and it's sort of in the way on this side. So when I get the slide, which hasn't come yet, I'm going to have a bit of a look and see what we can do. But there's only about from there to there, we've got what, 50mm, 100mm slide, something like that much travel, 100mm travel. And probably on that big brass nut in there, there's enough length there to screw the slide into that, and then we can put it on the inside and everything's out of sight. And, anyway, we'll see what we can do with that. No real plans. We've got to get the cables out of the way and fixed as well. Unsure whether I'm ever going to bolt this down, and it moves around, and that's probably really good. If I added coolant to this, I probably would, but what this is more likely to get, and what is most useful, is on this side to fit a tank and a drip feed and a tap onto the cutter, because for horizontal work, that's what really is the best feature, is the old-fashioned drip on the cutter. The other thing that I'd really like to fit up here, and at this point it hasn't happened, is a cover over the front of this and over the back, so that we don't get chips and stuff on our slide and our scales and things like that. So at this point, that's probably going to happen sooner rather than later, whether we get some leather or something else to put over here. I don't think it's going to be fancy or concertinaed because we're going to lose a lot there, but something that hangs over the hand wheel is not going to be a huge deal. And that's the only really exposed slide. This one on here is not really an issue, and this one up and down here I don't think is particularly an issue. It's vertical and it's fairly easy to wipe and get to. So at the moment I'm at this with a brush every day and it's a bit of a pain. Anyway, I thought you might like a look at it, see what I've done, some idea of the capabilities of the thing. It's certainly capable of taking that big cutter to full depth now, whereas before it wasn't. And a 2.5 inch cutter was about, or 2 inch cutter was about the absolute limit of this machine, which is a bit of a pain. Now I can run this 4 inch cutter without any issues, and 4 inch side and face cutters for horizontal milling are cheap. No one wants them. They're out there everywhere. 2.5 inch side and face cutters are a bit harder to find. So lots of little projects for this mill, and lots of little projects and things that I can make with this, or make for this mill, and it will happen. I'd like at some point to clean these holes out here and put decent oilers in them. Probably this one's going to have a piece screwed on here with a bit of sealant and a proper pump oiler on each end to keep the dirt out. And a similar thing is going to happen on the other slides as well, I think, because this come with little wooden plugs in here, which is okay, but it's a pain in there. We'll probably put proper oilers in here. Anyway, thanks for subscribing. All our new subscribers, a big thanks and a big shout out to you guys. Shout out to anyone else who's been very helpful with this mill. There's 3 or 4 channels that are messing around with benchtop horizontals at the moment, and it is a fairly useful little machine because it's crazy solid, and it's capable of doing some real work in a very small space, whereas a benchtop vertical SIG or something that's a similar size, you're messing around with tiny little cuts for hours and hours and hours. So it's a good reason to find one of these, and it's also a fairly cheap investment. This has cost me all up with the new motor and all up, it's cost me about $1,000 Australian, I guess, and most of that was shipping to get it here from the other end of the country. So it's not a bad little mill, and it's certainly capable of doing some heavy work. Anyway, more soon. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and be kind to each other is the most important thing.